Alright, folks, we are going to dive headfirst into some craziness now. We are ready to begin the Lister API, and this is something that might not get done today. There's a good chance that it won't be fully done today, and even if the first pass of it is done, it's going to take some time to get everything moved over that can be moved over from the Lister API, or with the Lister API, but basically, I think we can get at least some bare bones skeleton version of it set up tonight. So I'm gonna do that. Now, before I do anything else, I actually like this theme a lot, and I'm going to write it down. Comment stays the same, and now keyword is alright, perfect. Yeah, there we go. That way I can have this theme again in the future. Now, the Lister API. So there's all kinds of questions in my head about exactly how I want this to look. I have some notes in a few different places of how the Lister API might work. There are a couple of different possibilities, so I'm going to look those up real quick. And I'm also going to look at some of the code that implements listing internally to get an idea of what's going to look like there, and just start trying to get some ideas in my head. So give me a minute to start looking these things up. UI.cpp list. Yeah, so the code that controls the lists right now: sys file list, live file list. So I basically have two separate list code paths, one for each type of list. There's either file lists or live file system lists, and then the currently open buffered list, I guess I should call it. And there's the sure to kill list, which is much simpler, but that's the, if I do make a change and then kill, this thing is also actually a list, right? It doesn't have all the exact same features, but it's basically the same thing. So we're going to try to figure out how to make the most reasonable generalization for all of this. It's also sure to close, yeah. So that's technically 4, but the last two are pretty much identical. The upper two are pretty identical too, although there's a little bit of difference in how the input is handled. So yeah, I think it might be worth it to try to keep these in here, and instead of trying to mutate them until they're all one code path or something like that, which is one option sometimes, but I feel like in this case that's not the right option. I feel like in this case I'll just build a whole new version of this that does the user-defined one, and then I'll slowly, one at a time, re-implement these in the user-defined one until the user-defined one is the only one I actually need. And then I can get rid of the idea that there are modes from that direction. Now let me look this part up. Yeah. So it would be basically, what would the layers be? There'd be a layer that is text input control. Which would sit on top of a layer that is generating the list options each time, maybe? There's so many things. So I'm trying to figure out what the lowest level thing I would want it would be. Should sorting be on the job of the person submitting the options? I think yes. Should narrowing the list of options be on the job of the person submitting? There's certainly layers I could add. The lowest level would be to just say you specify, you specify sort of any other search bar. This would be just another search bar, right? Another string bar thing there, and and then you would specify that we're going into lister mode, and it would do all of the items in the list. You just submit them, whatever they are. And you can see, like here, this is not a substring of these, so that's actually what I need it to do, because the relationship between the string in the field and the actual string that we're narrowing down to would be yeah, so that would be the thing. But there's so many questions. So how does that look when the point is, does the user have to be able to get the list? Does the user have to be able to get the list and pass it in all the time? So do we get the list of files and pass it down? What happens when we change folders? How does that loop look? The list can change after every input. So what's really happening here I need to get a picture of the input to response loop, the updated list, when updated lists need to happen in that loop, and then I can plan out some layers here to some degree. I could also try and do a little bit of practice usage code. Jackson Banan, I had some sushi. Okay, okay. So yeah, I wanted to figure out that loop of user input, different types of input that can be received, how they update the list, where the information has to come from for at each of those stages, and where it needs to go to, what is handled by the core and isn't, and then we can start figuring out some constraints on the API. At some point along the way there, I'll be ready to write a usage code version of the API and then finally implement it. That's the order in which I think this will have to happen. Yeah, so that's... Yeah, some other I want to take some notes of things I want to make sure I get in there while we're working on this. So we want to make sure that it's easy to specify the list in various ways. Sometimes you have like just possibly very different weird sources for items you're going to add into the list, and so it needs to be easy to compose things from different sources that might have different organization. Also, you don't want it to be a thing where if you have like an array that's just all the items you want to submit, or a linked list of the items you want to submit, that you always have to loop it and call each one individually and submit it through a system like that. So yeah, I want to look at just making it as easy as possible to specify items. Then I need to know the loop. So along with that, I need to be able to set description strings and I don't know, I feel like I want... shoot, I did it again. Nope. Right here we obviously want to be able to put loaded on there, and then I think after that I want a third string that's like, so there's like a description string that's in a color like this one or something, or a similar color to this. Maybe a new color in the palette so that I could have like a slightly different blue there, but a description string. I might also want to be able to like align those into columns automatically when I'm rendering it. And then there's the this code, this text here. What is this? This is like a status. Status strings. Okay. Jackson Banan asks, if I do subs with directory, like mix subs directories, and how do I keep it through restarts? I do. So if I pull it up real quick, you can see I've got like, ignore this one, this is some other different thing, but I have basically 3 subs directories, F, W, and Y, that I actually all the computers that I set up for personal use, I always set them up with these 3. And the way I make that happen automatically is that under Y, which is the one that I use for basically setting up all my scripts and whatnot, I have in here somewhere, maybe it's not actually in here, I forget how exactly you do it. There's like a place where you can set up startup how do you do that? Startup. There it is. So I just have a setup subs bat file in the startup folder right here, and so that gets run on login basically. And I also need to be able to set user data pointer to link the result back to the intended effect. What else? What else? Yeah, the startup folder should be default, at least on Windows 7. I don't know if it's different in other versions or something, but you should just be able to find that startup folder wherever it is and put like any executable file like batch or executable binary you put in there. I think it just runs on startup automatically. If I'm remembering correctly. I think it's just as simple as that, putting it in the startup folder. Okay, so I think I have enough thoughts scribbled down here. So what I really want to do is think about how this works. When I type a character, what's happening right now is that's getting consumed by a UI system before it ever comes through here. What's going to need to happen is it's going to need to be consumed in a coroutine loop. So it's actually going to be the case that this comes all the way into the coroutine through a user input thing, and then once that has happened, the user can do whatever they want with it. So if they see some text input, for instance, they can choose to put it onto their string however they want. Once they've done that, they can update the list by declaring a new list, submitting the new list, right? And then the only question is, well, how do I get notified if the event is the user clicking? That comes in as a user input. So when clicks happen, or arrow keys, user input events coming to me, and then I dispatch them back. Is that what I want? An input event comes in. And if whatever it is, I dispatch it however I want. So if it's a click, that doesn't necessarily mean that you click on something in the list, but it could mean that. So how do we decide which ones are highlighted? I guess that's just a separate, okay, we're getting somewhere. Highlighted options. So then if I see arrow keys, that's just a matter of cycling through a set of indexes. So if I'm like right here, for instance, and I go boom, yeah, okay, because that comes in and we just set the index back to 0 after we recreate the list. And so the user code, not the core, has to keep track of that position on the list. And then when an up or down arrow comes in, I again get to dispatch how does that get handled, and that could get handled as moving the index, but the list could then be used for more complicated things like selecting a set of things. Okay, that's pretty cool, because then our user could just like have it set up so that if you're holding shift, it's still moving down but like selecting each one as it goes, and so then that particular list wouldn't have an index but rather a bool for each option that it submits. Or like that it's tracking or whatever, right? That's pretty cool. So that's what we'll do. We'll have the user submit the highlight option. They can also submit, hey, is this option under the cursor? Now, that raises an interesting issue. How does the user know that that is under the cursor when they submit it? If they're submitting these as an array, for instance, I don't think they could know. They would have to find out by first doing a layout pass to find out where all of these options are going to end up, looking at where the mouse is in relation to that list, and then going back solving to the index. That would just basically be a matter of the height of these things and the horizontal range of these things. take the mouse positions. If it's in the horizontal range, subtract the top left corner, divide by the height of one of these things. So it's possible that they could solve for that, but that's a bit odd. I feel like I don't like that because they're not in control of the height of these things. So the code that does the control the height and the layout should also be the code that tells you whether or not a particular item is being hovered by the mouse. But by the time you know the layout, you've already committed to what is highlighted and what isn't, unless it gets highlighted it gets laid out one at a time, one call at a time. Then well, I mean, even then, how would it work? Would you say, here's the thing, and then get the thing back, and then change the thing you just submitted? I see. How exactly would the mouse part work? The good news is we do know the mouse position when we're doing this, so that wouldn't be the problem. Although this would mean that we'd have to handle mouse moves if we're going to do this hover thing, right? But I guess that's not a big problem because we already have to handle these, and so it could not possibly be any worse than what I'm already doing. So we know the mouse position. We could set a flag that's just like highlight the one the mouse hovers on, and so you can just set that to true. This doesn't let you do more fancy stuff. Now what we could do is say if you wanted to know anything else, like if you want the fact that the mouse is hovering over something to affect it in other ways, like not just to hover but in more complex things, maybe it puts I don't know, the text looks different when you hover it for some reason. It expands for whatever type of list you're making. Then I feel like what we would need to be able to do is say, here is the list I'm going to submit, get feedback for then on things like where the mouse hovers, and then update from there. Let me just think. What if I know how many I'm going to have beforehand? Ooh, that doesn't really feel that good either. I mean, if I know how many of these I have, what can I do to take advantage of that? I can tell the layout system, hey, here's how many of these things I have. It can tell me the rectangles where it's planning to put them, and then I am basically filling those rectangles with the data, and then I can say, hey, if this pointer is inside the rectangle for the one I'm laying out now, that can change what I fill with. But that means I have to know the number, get the layout, get the rectangle, get the slots that I'm gonna fill, and then fill them. It's a bit weird. It's a bit weird. I don't love that. What if I was just submitting the rectangles myself, along with everything else? I mean, then whoever writes the listing stuff would also be in control of the height, and we would just be submitting rectangles. Then they could do like a list with like left and right motion as well if they wanted. I mean, that could be the start of a table system. Whoa, hold on. Sorry to like, I'm just wondering if the best way to do this. Sorry to get in a weird position where you probably can't see me, but this is going deeper than I expected. If I submit the rectangles as a user, I could lay out pretty much any set of rectangles, including a table with arbitrary amounts of like weirdnesses in column organization, row organization, all kinds of weirdness. Each of the options would still be constrained to just being 3 strings and whether or not it's highlighted. And since I'm the user, I know the rectangles and the mouse position. I can test for things before I submit them. Because I would figure out the rectangle I'm going to submit, check the pointer, like check the mouse pointer to the rectangle, and then submit the thing with whatever modification I wanted. Then I could make a layer that helps a user who only wants to submit strings and doesn't care about the rectangle layout and they're just making a list. So there would be the lowest level layer does rectangles. Okay. Okay, what else? Then if the input I get, okay, look at the input loop, that's where we were at the started. So getting back to the input loop idea, we start by laying out a list, we wait for some input. We get, say, a mouse move. So we relay out the list, see that the mouse is now hovering a different rectangle, change which one is highlighted. We get a mouse click. So we take a look at, given that input, what do? We already have the data structure for the layout. We just got a click, so we know which one should be, we should be able to figure out which one is highlighted. Then do whatever we want with it. But how do we figure out which one is highlighted exactly? Well, if we have this data structure sitting there that we've built and submitted, if we just leave that data structure intact, which there's no reason why we wouldn't, we could just submit a point and say, give me the rectangle that this hits. Okay. This also puts the user in control of scrolling. So let me get an example where there's actually scrolling to be done. Yeah. So the user would be completely in control of scrolling. It would be its own thing. Which might be for the best. Okay, the only problem with that is that means that your scroll rule would no longer apply directly. But what we could still do is allow the user to query the views scroll struct. Alternatively, they could just lay out as if, but then they can't skip down. That's the problem. No, they still can. They don't have to lay things out that are off screen. They just have to start their Y counter from near the view, wherever the scrolling is currently. So the scroll could still go through the normal scroll system. That way that the scroll rule applies universally. And it determines what section of rectangles we see, and it's up to the user to optimize it by only submitting rectangles within a nearby area of the view. Okay. So that's nuts. Okay, what else can we do? I think that answers most of my questions at this point. The input loop is we build one of these lists. We submit it and begin a coroutine blocking function to get input from the user. We then can dispatch that input however we want using helper APIs on the custom side to either activate some action or update and relay out the list and then wait on the input again. When they click, they find out who they hit by using the helper API, and then all the other things that I want to do to make it easy to use would just be wrappers on top of this, which wouldn't be very hard to get right, I don't feel like. Okay. Okay. This is going to be crazier than I thought. Even going into it, I didn't realize where this was going quite this deep, but it's gonna be off the hook. Okay. Just checking the chat to see if any questions on that. But it looks like this late at night, we are mostly just good to get started right now. Okay, so with that understood, I'm going to write I'm going to write a dummy version of one of these. Hold on a minute. If I was okay with eliminating some of these features, I could actually maintain this as well. Because these would just be list items where I submit the color scheme. Somehow I could do that. That's a little overboard, I guess. Because we're talking about arbitrary colors with arbitrary text, and yeah, it's not. I mean, this. I feel like all of this could work though. All of that, this stuff here. Yeah, I can literally do all of this from the custom side once I have a listing API. I guess the only thing I can't do is that, but then that could just be a keyboard shortcut instead. Okay, so I might not be able to recover this very easily using just this plan. Unless, I mean, what we're basically saying is that we're going to do a UI system, a brand new UI system. And all this UI system ever has to do is I submit a data structure that describes what to render to 4coder, which consists of rectangular areas and strings, and under some circumstances maybe instead consists of a color scheme and a rectangle, and then it does one of these blocks, one of these built-in things here. And maybe, just maybe someday I want to be able to do like arbitrary strings like this. But then with that, I could eliminate these button things, and we would just keep, I would eliminate all this. This would be totally different. This would be like a text file. But the rest of it would pretty much just work. All of this would be, yeah. Okay, I think we can do it. I want to check something though. How much time did that take? 36 minutes. Alright, 36 minutes of planning is what I spent. Let's now do it. We're going to do interactive switch buffer. And you know what? I feel like I can't do this without music, so give me one more minute while I put music on. What am I going to do today? I'm going to put on... Okay. That shouldn't be allowed anymore. Although I don't need the buffer, do I? So we're going to make a list. We want buffer next. There we go. Okay. Block flags. Dirty. Hey, hello! What's going on here? I'm adding a new lister system that lets me make a customizable, like, lets the users customize lists in 4coder so that they can make, like, their own lists of options and have them narrow down when they're typing or click on them and whatever. And that will be used for building all kinds of other awesome commands. And, how do you deal with fonts in the code, by the way? In what code? In the code for 4coder? In the custom layer? What do you mean by in the code? Alright, let's make some helper versions of this, or wrapper versions of this. Oh, I'm out of water. I'll have to go take care of that in a second. To answer your question before I go get water, I did use the STB library for a little while, the STB TrueType library. I went through a few phases. The very first version was the SDL TTF stuff, like the SDL font rendering library. Then I switched to the STB one, and then I finally landed on FreeType, at least as of now. At some point in the future, probably I'll switch over to operating system dependent APIs for font rendering so that I can get that super smooth clear type aliasing that matches the look of all the operating systems separately. For Linux, I'll probably stay on FreeType. Anyway, one sec. Alright. And resume. Alright, description and status. Whoops. Let's go fix that real quick. I put music on. I indeed put music on. That doesn't actually have what I need though. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have been able to make 4coder work the way it does without OpenGL in terms of speed. It used to take up like close to maybe like, I mean, not quite 16 milliseconds, but close to it, like 10, which is about half of a frame at 30 frames per second, and now it can run at 60 frames per second most of the time. So there's no way it could do what it does now without OpenGL or some kind of hardware accelerated renderer. Just reading through this code right now. So what I'm seeing is UI. I'm still not sure where. I guess there's a rectangle here. Click button input. Scroll rect. Okay, I'm still not totally sure I understand, but I think that the rect is actually coming from right here. So let me go look at that. There it is, line height times 2. Transient line height. Where does that come from? Alright, that's literally directly from the font metrics height. Okay. Line height right there in the view. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. Not yet. Too soon. Yeah, that seems better. Now, alright, having built everything we need into the item, the only thing we need to do now is do a list control add item, list item. Alright, so that lets us fill the list with items. But when I'm doing one of these, I also have that thing at the top that's like that. And that doesn't want to scroll with everything else, so kind of suggests that when I'm submitting rectangles, I do want to use absolute coordinates, not relative coordinates. So the user's in charge of the scrolling. Okay. Alright, so I guess what I need to do is, in addition to all of this, I'm going to set type equals list item type normal option. And then we're going to have up here another list item that we're going to add one of. It's going to have an item type of list item type text field. text field item 0. Text field item equals item. What do I think about fencing? Do you mean the sport or the thing where you put memory read and write fences in your code? You know, to be honest, I've never done any fencing. I thought it would be interesting at one point, but I didn't I don't know, didn't commit very hard to getting into it. So the most getting into it I did was when I was at school once, they were doing club fair thing. I can't remember what they called it, but you go and look at all the different clubs and stuff. And I went and found the fencing club and took some information and looked at it, and then I didn't ever go. And that's as much as I know. I can't analyze the sport in terms of if it's good or not, so I really honestly don't know. Alright, so now I'm specifying all of this and that. So I feel like the next step that you're supposed to take is well, hold on. Gonna need 1 minute. Alright, right, when in the process here it gets user input, it must be starting a, right, it just has to say that it starts a query bar and then get user input and then it's done, right, okay. This call tells the active view to begin displaying a query bar, which is a small GUI. More stops showing when the command exits. The only use for this call is in an interactive command that makes calls to get user input. Yeah, same basic idea. So we're going to do a start start UI mode. Are you adding robust input support in those query buffers? I'm not sure what kind of input support you mean. It's not on today's list either way, but I don't know exactly what you mean either by robust. I mean, does it have a bug for some particular uses, or are you talking about something else? Oh, you mean like, yeah, someday I'll do that. Supporting all the commands by, yeah, yep. That's not going to happen in the alpha run, though. That'll happen when I switch to 4.10, or one of the 4.1x's. It might not be in there right away. But I need to basically change up how the whole query bar stuff works a little bit to get there by making it run through a command system again, which it doesn't do. View set list, and then what we're going to do is user input in equals get user input Oh, we might have to deal with the fact that mouse move isn't available yet at some point. Alright, so it's something like this. Alright, we're getting somewhere here. So, at each step, we're gonna blah 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 blah. Okay. And then once we've built that, we say there's our current list. We get input from the user. Custom doc is for putting a doc string that can be parsed out later. So if it sees a custom command sig, that just gets replaced with a signature for this, a procedure with this name that matches the signature of a command. Custom doc doesn't actually expand to anything when it is. Custom doc doesn't expand to anything when we're compiling, but it's there so that when we pull out metadata, we can find the signatures. Like we can find these, and any of them that have a doc on it is taken to and put into the metadata array. Alright, target buffer. What I'm looking for right now is how do I set the buffer of a view, I guess. Yeah, so Jackson Banan asked, did you ever look at the source code of open source text editors and study what specific things they do? A little bit. I looked at Emacs in particular, but not for what you would think. I mostly looked at Emacs to study how it did things like file change notifications, font rendering, um, uh, like launching commands. Definitely don't replicate the way that Emacs does most stuff, though. That's definitely like I looked a little bit at how they set up their buffers and stuff, and it's all nasty craziness. Like they're a little bit nutty with how the actual buffer control stuff is implemented. Okay, what I'm looking for is subster. Splitting like windows and stuff. I mean, that was stuff that I sort of worked out by trial and error. I went through several panel systems to land on this one. So like, the original one only did vertical splits, so there was just like, there was no way to do this kind of thing originally. You could only do this. And so you could do as many of those as you wanted, but you could only do like making them thinner this way. And then I did a couple of revisions working out how to do panels the way I wanted them. What's interesting is back when I started 4coder, figuring out how to do the panels was one of the things that was really daunting at first. Like, that was definitely, I was definitely at a point where I was able to handle it, but it was kind of like, it's weird to say now, but figuring out how to lay panels out was kind of the height that I could reach in the early days. I was super proud of getting that working cleanly. Whereas now it's like, you know, so many years in the past now that I could rewrite it every single day and never like trip up once. So yeah, Point is that I don't really have a lot of deep insights into it just because it's become pretty old hat for me now. It's just, it is what it is, you know, I guess the only thing you need to think about to understand it is it's hierarchical, right? So this is one big rectangle, and it contains this subrectangle and this subrectangle, and if we split this and like this is still one subrectangle, and this is one subrectangle, but this one now has more subrectangles, this one and this one. And this one has more subrectangles, this one and this one, and so on. Point is, because it's hierarchical, that clued me in that what I needed was a data structure that was tree-like. No, so it doesn't think of its neighbors as parents. Basically, the actual panels are the leaves of the tree, and the hierarchy, like there's an abstract rectangle here that is not being used as a panel, and then there's a concrete panel there and there. So those two panels are the leaves of the abstract panel that is this whole screen, right? And so if I do like a couple of layers of that and a couple layers of that, for instance, so this right here is an abstract rectangle. If I take this whole area, right, all of this that I'm circling, that's abstract. And so it has two children. This, which is a leaf node, and therefore a panel, is put on there. And this, which is an another abstract node, right? This is a node with two children. Its children are this one and this one. So the internal nodes are like the splits. The splits kind of, the internal node knows the abstract rectangle at that position, and the split that make the next two children. And so it knows if the split is horizontal or vertical and where that split is in terms of ratio of the whole range. Um, I'm trying to think of what I need to work on next. So I require that to be a substring of that. I create these lists of rectangles, and then I submit my rectangle list. And then I get user input, and then I act on the user input. I guess I still need to talk about how we do this part, but I need to run for a second. So when we get mouse input, I forget how that actually looks. Mouse state. Alright, so I press L, and now what I want to be able to do is I want to query, yeah, How do I want this to work? I'm just not sure. So here are the two things that I'm thinking are possible. Alright, well for one thing, if a mouse move event comes in, I kind of want to know that I'm getting a mouse move event and not update the whole list every time that happens, you know? But with that thought on set aside for now as an optimization that I'll deal with later, I guess whenever I click, I definitely need to use the list that was already there to answer the question, what did I click? Interesting. Yeah, so getting that actually fully right is going to take a while. It's going to be a long process, this thing. But let's So the two things I could do is I could either check up here or check right here. If I check right here, the advantage is that if this changes, I get the right answer anyway. If I check up here, then the one that I highlight is the one that I actually start clicking on. I'm going to do it down here. So this is going to be like list control get mouse hit. Just had a thought. Alright, so in here, instead of doing this right here, what I'm going to do is say that the activated item should be selected by doing something like Okay, interesting. I just had a wild thought that I won't share because I'm not sure I totally understand all of it yet, but I was just thinking about sorting and sorting lists of elements in a UI, and a weird thought came to me. Anyway, still with you here. View set buffer. Alright, I think that's about as much as I can take for one day. We didn't get to implementing any of this yet, but let me see if I can pull up my chat so I can see all of nice folks as I say goodbye. We didn't get to implementing any of this yet, but I now have a very good idea of how everything is going to work. I'll probably put it off until next weekend, getting back to this and implementing it, and then once it's implemented, there's just so much more work to do still, because even with this first pass of this thing implemented, you can see there's all kinds of things like this right now only works if I don't switch away from it. So like right now it's possible to pull this up over here, pull this up over here, and I have two separate lists going. But it's not possible to have a search going on over here and then have a search going on over here. I'm probably going to want to make it so that I can have that. I don't know if that's okay or not, though. Like, there are reasons to think that that's actually a really bad idea. Like, it would mean that I have asynchronous shit happening with my two different arenas, that I could be clearing the arena here to a point before that arena, before its use in another coroutine is done. So I would need to think carefully if I even want to go down that road. It might be better to just say, I keep it separate, actually, now that I say that. The point is, there's a lot of these questions that I need to address. Like, do I want this to run in a coroutine for real, or do I want to start setting up like a view modes thing and have, when I am in the custom layer, let the commands be separate and start driving these things through commands? Maybe that's the future. I don't know. What I do know is that I can't take much more of this right now. We've got a pretty good first pass of what a lot of this code needs to look like so that it can specify things. This is a very low-level version of this. I'm going to do, you know, a lot of work to keep on pushing it down and down so that this is at the very lowest level, and eventually the thing that implements this would probably, the only work you would have to do is iterate this buffer here and generate a list of like the strings that it needs to submit, and then send that down to a generic lister thing that it builds on top of this, so that all you ever do is submit a list of strings and it runs the whole thing for you afterwards, right? And then once it finally activates, then you have the code in here that finally handles that. I'll have to think about how exactly that's going to go, but that's not anywhere near time for that yet. We're working on this low-level stuff, so it's all ready to be implemented next time, and I'll figure out what I do next once this stuff works. Thanks for everyone who came and chatted. I know I have one question sitting in the chat I'm going to handle off stream. So don't you worry, I didn't miss it, but I'm going to handle that when I'm done. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you guys around. Bye bye.